Welcome to iEnglish, lessons that instruct, inform, and inspire. I'm your teacher, Neda Bezerra. Hi, what's up? Welcome to lesson number 7. Hi, what do you do? Let's repeat after me. What do you do? Once again, what do you do? I work in an office. I work in an office. Let's repeat after me. I work in an office. I work in an office. Very good, you're doing really well. What does she do? O que ela faz? She works in a shoe store. Ela trabalha numa sapataria. She works in a restaurant. Ela trabalha num restaurante. She works in a grocery store. Ela trabalha num supermercado. Let's repeat after me. What does she do? What does she do? She works in a shoe store. She works in a shoe store. She works in a restaurant. She works in a restaurant. She works in a grocery store. She works in a grocery store. Você também pode fazer esta mesma pergunta usando uma outra forma. What does he do for a living? What does he do for a living? He works for Microsoft. He works for Microsoft. He works for Google. He works for Google. Very good. So, let's recap this question. Vamos recapitular esta pergunta. What do you do? What does he do? What does she do? Então, com you você usa o do e com he e she você usa o does. Let's repeat after me. What do you do? What do you do? What does he do? What does he do? What does she do? What does she do? Very good, you're doing really well. So, let's recap. Vamos recapitular. I work in a local restaurant. Eu trabalho num restaurante local. I work in an office. Eu trabalho no escritório. I work in a shoe store. Eu trabalho numa sapataria. Let's repeat after me. I work in a local restaurant. I work in a local restaurant. I work in a local restaurant. I work in an office. I work in an office. I work in an office. I work in a shoe store. I work in a shoe store. I work in a shoe store. Se o sujeito for da terceira pessoa do singular, he, she ou it, o verbo fica works. Então vamos lá. She works in a restaurant. She works in a restaurant. She works in an office. She works in an office. She works in a shoe store. She works in a shoe store. You say work at when you talk about the company that you work at. Você usa work at quando você fala o nome da empresa para a qual você trabalha. So let's practice. I work at Burger King. I work at Burger King. I work at McDonald's. I work at McDonald's. I work at Microsoft. I work at Microsoft. I work at Boticário. I work at Boticário. Very good. You say work for when you refer to a company or to a boss. Você diz work for quando você se refere à empresa para a qual você trabalha ou o nome do seu patrão, do seu gerente. For instance, por exemplo, I work for Microsoft. I work for John. I work for Sarah. Let's repeat after me. I work for Microsoft. I work for John. I work for Sarah. Very good. When you say I work for John, it is the same as saying I work under John. He's my manager. John is my manager. Então, quando você diz eu trabalho para o John, é a mesma coisa de dizer eu trabalho sob a direção do John. Ele é meu gerente. So let's repeat after me. I work for John. I work for John. I work under John. He's my manager. Very good. Now let's try with Sarah. I work for Sarah. I work for Sarah. That means I work under Sarah. Isso significa eu trabalho sob a direção da Sarah. Sarah is my manager. A Sarah é minha gerente. So let's repeat. I work for Sarah. Sarah is my manager. Very good. Work at can also mean a place where you work as an employee. For instance, por exemplo, I work for the University of California at Berkeley. Eu trabalho para a Universidade da Califórnia em Berkeley. Você não diz in Berkeley, but at Berkeley. I work for the University of California at Berkeley. A Universidade da Califórnia tem campus em várias cidades. So, let's practice. I work for the University of California at Berkeley. I work for the University of California at Berkeley. I work for the University of California at Davis. I work for the University of California at Davis. I work for the University of California at San Diego. I work for the University of California at San Diego. I work for the University of California at Riverside. I work for the University of California at Riverside. Work in refers to a location. Work in se refere à localização. For instance, por exemplo, I work in the United States. Eu trabalho nos Estados Unidos. I work in France. Eu trabalho na França. I work in a hospital. Eu trabalho no hospital. When you say I work at a hospital, it implies that your job is related to the hospital somehow, that you are a doctor or you are a nurse. Então, quando você diz I work at a hospital, significa que o seu trabalho é relacionado com o hospital de alguma forma, que você é um médico ou você é uma enfermeira. So let's repeat. I work at a hospital. I'm a doctor. I work at a hospital. I'm a nurse. Very good. When you say I work in a hospital, it implies that you are working in the building. Quando você diz I work in a hospital, significa dizer que você está trabalhando no prédio. Perhaps, talvez, as a janitor. Talvez como um zelador. So let's repeat after me. I work in a hospital. I work in a hospital. I work in a hospital as a janitor. Very good. You can also say I work with. Eu trabalho com. I work with customers. Eu trabalho com clientes. I work with computers. Eu trabalho com computadores. I work with elderly people. Eu trabalho com pessoas idosas. So let's repeat after me. I work with customers. I work with customers. I work with computers. I work with computers. I work with elderly people. I work with elderly people. Very good. You're doing really well. You can also say I work as. Eu trabalho como. For instance, por exemplo, I work as an accountant. Eu trabalho como um contador. Which means, que significa I am an accountant. Eu sou um contador. I work as a journalist. Eu trabalho como um jornalista. Which means I am a journalist. Let's repeat. I work as an accountant. I work as an accountant. I work as a journalist. I work as a journalist. Very good. We can also say I work in. Eu trabalho em. I work in advertising. Eu trabalho em publicidade ou com publicidade. I work in construction. Eu trabalho em construção ou com construção. I work in catering. Eu trabalho com refeições. So let's repeat after me. I work in advertising. I work in advertising. I work in construction. I work in construction. I work in catering. I work in catering. Very good. E para terminar, nós vamos aprender uma estrofe de um poema de William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth foi o maior poeta romântico inglês, que ao lado de Samuel Taylor Coleridge ajudou a lançar o romantismo na literatura inglesa, com a publicação conjunta em 1798 das Lyrical Ballads. The name of the poem is Ode on Intimations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood, que significa tributo às intimações de imortalidade das lembranças da primeira infância. Esta estrofe ficou muito famosa porque ela foi lida em uma cena do filme Splendor in the Grass, Esplendor na Relva, de 1961, que se tornou um clássico do cinema americano, do diretor Elia Kazan, com os atores Natalie Wood e Warren Beatty. A Natalie Wood ganhou o Oscar de melhor atriz por este filme em 1962. Eu vou ler agora esta estrofe do poema de William Wordsworth e depois eu vou colocar o clipe da cena com a Natalie Wood que imortalizou esta estrofe. What though the radiance which was once so bright be now forever taken from my sight, though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower, we will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind. E aqui está a tradução, que embora a radiância, que já foi tão brilhante, seja agora para sempre tirada da minha vista, embora nada possa trazer de volta a hora de esplendor na relva, de glória na flor, não vamos lamentar, mas sim encontrar força no que ficou para trás. E aqui segue a cena do filme Splendor in the Grass, com a Natalie Wood, que imortalizou esta estrofe do poema de William Wordsworth.
What though the radiance which was once so bright is now forever taken from my sight? Though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower, we will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind. Now, what do you suppose the poet means by these lines? Deanie Loomis.
Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Metcalf. I didn't hear the question.
Well, I know it's spring, Deanie, but I must ask you to pay more attention.
I'm sorry.
I quoted some lines from Wordsworth's Ode on Intimations of Immortality, Deanie. Did you hear them?
I'm afraid not, Miss Metcalf.
Well, then I must ask you to turn your text to page 380.
Yes.
You read the lines to me.
Yes.
Stand, please.
Though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, glory in the flower, we will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind.
Now, perhaps you can tell me exactly what the poet means by such expressions as splendor in the grass and glory in the flower.
Well, I think it has some...
Yes?
Well, when we're young, we look at things very Idealistically, I guess. And I think Wordsworth means that when we grow up, that we have to forget the ideals of youth and find strength